Now, former FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon and Edina Lekovic is the spokeswoman for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, both of them joining us here in Los Angeles. Again, good to have you with us. Bobby, leaders of the mosque and the worshippers, they detained the driver. And they, at the same time, though, they protected him from any kind of, retaliation or any kind of violence from the people around him. Right. How important is that? How significant were those actions?
Well, I mean, the significance is far beyond the physical nature of it, right? I mean, the significance is the impression that it gives to the people outside that these are peaceful people that were attacked. There was no justification for this attack. And when you can actually, I think the imam was the one that was mainly protecting him from making sure that nobody else, I mean, that's a very significant public act, and it should be mentioned, it should be talked about.
And in terms of the investigation, though, they've got the guy, he's alive, he's in custody, he can talk.
Right, and that's why we're going to find out more about him and what his motivations are. We're already hearing some contradictory things about him. Friends or neighbors say they're shocked. The family members are already saying he was troubled. So I think in the next day or two, we're going to find out really the whole story behind this guy.
Edina, what's your take on that moment that it was quite notable to see the imam protecting the attacker who apparently targeted Muslims?
Well, I think once again, in these kinds of horrific situations, we see the worst of humanity and the best of humanity. And I think that the imam and the other gentlemen who were formed a protective ring around the perpetrator until law enforcement got there did the right thing, right? Did the thing that we hope all Londoners would do, let alone faith leaders. And I think that for me as a Muslim, during this holy month of Ramadan, that imam and that community that's reeling during this attack, during one of our most sacred times of year, they're in my heart and my prayers. And I'm really appreciative that Mayor Khan and Prime Minister May have stepped up and are urging unity and solidarity in this moment, and showing that they were slow in the beginning, but they reacted the right way to label this as a terrorist attack. It's important that we treat them equally.
And of course, that action by the imam and others from the mosque goes a long way to avoiding what some fear could be the start of a cycle of violence, where this attack breeds another attack, and you get this tit for tat attacks in London and elsewhere.
And that's what's so frightening here. What the law enforcement in London have said is that after the London Bridge attacks and the marketplace attacks, there was a 5-fold increase in Islamophobic events that took place in the week following that attack. And we know that that's generally the case, is when there's active terrorism, we see backlash that spikes immediately afterwards. And no person should be afraid to walk down the street because of the color of their skin or their nationality or their gender. And unfortunately, in a place like London right now, it can far too easily feel like no one's safe. But the fact that people come together is the most critical thing, so that we don't allow ourselves to be divided, because that's what ISIS and others want. If we can weaponize cars, that would make us feel that we should stay in our homes rather than expose ourselves to be vulnerable. But that's the exact wrong answer. We have to go out and show that we're stronger than this.
Bobby, when it comes to the investigation and counterterrorism, I mean, when you look at the handful of terror attacks that we've had in London and in Paris, and I think it was even in Brussels, the suspects were known to police. They had already been flagged, but this case, not so much.
Yeah, well, we're yet to be seen. What the family said was he was a troubled individual. So we're going to get down into the weeds on what that meant as far as troubled. Was it a history of mental illness? Was it a history of violence, or both, as we saw last week in the Virginia shooting? So, I mean, I think we're going to see that as the next day or two go on. But there are some of these guys that snap. They've got a little bit of mental illness history, and then something pushes them over the edge, and then that's what the investigation needs to focus on.
Just with regards to using a car as a weapon, there doesn't seem to be a lot of security you can do to actually stop that and still have roads and people move around. So then it comes down to intelligence, right?
Right.
So then, but you get as an investigator and as counterintelligence folks, they get their intelligence with regards to attacks carried out by Islamic terrorist groups from the Muslim community, right? So you need a good relationship with Muslim groups.
Absolutely, and that's always an ongoing process. Especially here in this country, the FBI has outreach programs that are ongoing, and we always need to do a better job at that, and ensure that that's part of it. But we walk a fine line, because there's sometimes in certain communities there's there's a bad name for people who kind of cooperate with law enforcement. Informants, they call them informants, snitches. We don't like those words. We like to build more bridges and have it be more of a more of a community type endeavor.
So I just want to pick up on this. So Edina, how difficult is it for people within the Muslim community to go to the FBI, to go to the authorities, because there's a lack of trust, because they're worried about their own safety, or they're worried about reprisals if they get found out?
Sure. So there's certainly a level of distrust that exists between law enforcement and local Muslim communities because of surveillance and other operations that they've seen take place. However, that hasn't stopped people from reporting problematic individuals to law enforcement. We've seen that time and again, and we've seen law enforcement, unfortunately, not always intercede when necessary. And so the problem is complex. But the flip side of this is that law enforcement also needs to take a harder look at alt-right groups and white supremacist groups, because this is where we're seeing a commonality between some of these other perpetrators.
The trust factor, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're not doing community outreach with those groups.
Sure.
And so,
no, but I mean,
we need to look at
the FBI, if they're moving against the alt-right groups who are targeting Muslim communities, you're going to feel more inclined to deal with the FBI.
Well, absolutely. And look, at the Southern Poverty Law Center says that the rise of alt-right groups and white supremacist groups are the greatest threat facing our country in terms of domestic terrorism. So when we're all paying attention solely to religious groups or others, we are ignoring a huge part of the problem that costs many lives.
Tell us more, though, about the voices from the Muslim community and how they're feeling when they saw this attack happen. You spoke about backlash and, the rise of Islamophobia as soon as, we've seen these series of terror attacks.
It's bone-chilling. I mean, this could be any one of us. Something like 40% of American Muslims go to a mosque on a regular basis, and during Ramadan, it's like Christmas and Easter Christians, right? People come out for the holidays in higher numbers, and so our mosques are supposed to be a place of sanctuary, and so this can have a really big chilling effect for people who are just trying to live their lives every day, and there's very difficult dinner time conversations that are taking place in Muslim homes all across the United States and and the UK and other places.
Bobby, very quickly, we're seeing vehicles being used in London and across Europe, not really in the United States. Why not?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't know that I know the specific answer to that, but I know that in my experience over time, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, we did a lot more work on putting setbacks on a lot of our public venues anyway. You have ballards that are now retractable. You have government office buildings that have to have a certain setback now when you build them or you move into them. So, I mean, public gatherings, they're always going to be a danger. We can always have in East France here we had a situation years ago at the farmers market here in Santa Monica where it was a person who was elderly, it was an accident, but those type of things can happen. It would certainly be easier if someone wanted to do it on purpose. Why it doesn't happen, hopefully that's because I want to put an answer to it, but it's really difficult to say why it doesn't happen more often.
Let's just hope it stays that way. Bobby, Edina, thank you.